I wonder if there's any symbolism for you and me being in the place of Zerubbabel and needing help building these sacred spaces today. And we have Yeshua to help us through this process of building. And so the very first thing that they build up, verse 3, is the altar. And they put the altar there so they can start performing these sacrifices again in this sacred space. But you'll notice they're scared, because it's not like Jerusalem was just empty for 50 years after they got destroyed and carried away captive. Vacuums like to get filled, and Jerusalem got filled, but people haven't rebuilt the city or the temple. But there are a lot of people living in that region, not just in the destroyed city area, but in all the regions around about. So they're building this up knowing at any point we're kind of vulnerable here and we could be destroyed. So they start keeping these feasts, like Feast of the Tabernacles and the Sabbaths, the new moons, all of those traditions. And you jump down to verse 12. And it says, "But many of the priests and Levites and chief of the fathers, who were ancient men that had seen the first house when the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, wept with a loud voice, and many shouted aloud for joy." So the ones who had never seen the old temple of Solomon, the new generation, they're all shouting for joy. This is awesome. This is wonderful. We're rebuilding the temple. But the older generation that had known the first one, they weren't shouting for joy. They were weeping for joy to see, even though it's not in the same splendor as Solomon's. I think there's this gratitude of seeing that, okay, we're going to have our temple rebuilt after all. So at this point, as you're reading in scriptures, wouldn't you love it if the scriptures then said, "And it came to pass that because they were people who were trying really hard to keep the law of Moses, they're trusting in the Lord, they're working really hard, that everything just prospered and it just worked out beautifully and smooth sailing from here on out until they built the temple, consecrated and dedicated it." Wouldn't that be wonderful?
There wouldn't be a lot to talk about.
Yeah, then the whole book of the rest of Ezra and Nehemiah wouldn't exist. Because as you realize, living in a fallen world, just because you're trying really hard to do good things doesn't mean that everything automatically just works out perfectly for you. Sometimes there's an intense opposition that is raised, and you see that opposition in chapter 4 begin. And this isn't the end, this is just the beginning of the opposing forces. So verse 1 says, "Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto the Lord God of Israel, then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers and said unto them, Let us build with you, for we seek your God as ye do, and we do sacrifice unto him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assur."
Which is Assyria.
Assyria, which brought us up hither. So he brought us into this land. This land, it's the God of Israel. That's who we worship here, so we want to help you.
Yeah, you might remember when the Assyrians conquered the 10 northern tribes of the kingdom of Israel, they depopulated the 10 northern tribes area and repopulated it with people from all over the Assyrian Empire. And those people eventually become known as the Samaritans. And in fact, in the story, the people who were living, these people who have been populated now in the land of Israel, had to learn how to worship the God of the land, and a couple of priests were sent back from captivity to teach them. So now we're a couple hundred years later, these people say, gosh, we should have full access to these things. And the leaders in Judah and Jerusalem aren't certain, who are these people? Are they truly part of this tribe of God? And can we trust their intentions? So we have this challenge going on of, are these legitimate worshipers of God, or are they trying to hijack the efforts that are going on here?
And again, kind of like the Babylonian exile and people coming back, same thing applies to that Assyrian conquest. In certain parts of the biblical narrative, it makes it sound like Assyria just totally wiped out the entire population of Israelites in that northern kingdom and carried them all captive away and brought other brand new people in and then brought a few priests in. In other places, and in a lot of rabbinical traditions among the Jews, the belief is that the majority of the people were left. Some of the nobles and the rich and the elite were carried away. The rulers, the people who had the power to drive the masses, they're all taken away. And then some of the others as well. But there's a good portion left, but they're not the ruling class, and they're not Levites. They haven't been performing priestly functions, and now they're all intermarried. But you can see how they would say, but hey, Lord God of Israel, I'm part Israel, and I want to worship with you. And Zerubbabel and Yeshua are saying, no, you're not going to help us build this temple. And so what happens is this group then conspires against them, and they write a letter to the king and tell him, do you know what you're doing? Have you not read your history book? Jerusalem is a really disobedient city. And if you let them rebuild their temple, they're going to stop paying taxes to you, and they're going to rise up in rebellion all the time, and you're going to have a big headache on your hands, just so you know. So the king gets this letter, has the chronicles read to him, and realizes, yeah, this city keeps showing up as a problem. So he sends a cease and desist order to the builders of the temple. I wonder if that's ever happened to you, where you've been engaged in a great work, moving forward, and it's going really well, and you're so excited, and people are rejoicing to see the progress, and then something rises up to tell you, stop. You can't keep going any further. And that can happen in family settings, in church settings, in school settings, in vocational settings, in your career, in a variety of ways where all of a sudden you can be left with no recourse, nothing you can do to change the mind of this order of the king. Notice what happens in chapter 5. You get introduced to Haggai and Zechariah. We're going to talk about them in greater detail near the end of the Old Testament year when we get to their books. Verse 1 says, the prophets, Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo, prophesied unto the Jews that were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel, even unto them. So 2 prophets rise up and prophesy in the name of God, at which point you notice it says that Zerubbabel and Jeshua began to build the house of God. So they start building again. In the face of this cease and desist order
from the king of Persia,
they say, we're going to be fine.